Hey everyone, welcome to Revenue Management. Let's discuss market segmentation and selection. So when we refer to market segmentation, we're discussing the practice of dividing these markets into smaller and smaller categories or sections. And these segments ultimately should share similar characteristics. Now, certain characteristics might include, for instance, the purpose of travel. Okay, so are we traveling for business? Are we traveling for leisure? Maybe we're traveling for family. What about price sensitivity? Okay, so how sensitive are we to price? If the price goes up of the hotel, are we still going to travel? If they're not sensitive, could we raise our prices, make more money? We need to figure that out. What about the booking process? Where are they booking? What channels are they using? Can we hopefully use maybe less or more profitable channels? Would that still get them to book with us? What about the lead times? Do we expect them to book 30 days in advance or 2 days in advance? That's going to be important when we're doing our forecast as well. And how about the average length of stay? So if we have two different segments booking with us, is one going to stay longer than the other? Well, that's going to help us determine which one is more profitable. And also, speaking of profitability, what about their ancillary spend? So sure, they might buy a hotel room with us, but are they going to eat in the restaurant? Are they going to spend some time in the spa? Where else are they going to spend their money? What type of segment is more likely to use our facilities? That's also going to help us understand who we should target in terms of our price-value relationship. So ultimately, all these characteristics help us understand how we can be most profitable when we're running our hotel. Now, in regards to segmenting, there's three major or macro segments that are most common, but a disclaimer that each hotel and brand have different segmentation categories, okay, but this is the most common. And you might find some differences as well in the sim. But ultimately, we'll start with our transient guests. So transient simply means any individual traveler. Okay, so it could be business or pleasure, but typically any guest that is not part of a group. So they're traveling on their own. So I'm sure you guessed it. The next macro segment is our group. Okay, so group is anybody that's traveling more than two people, and ultimately they're going to block off amount of rooms in the hotel. Okay. And usually it's because there's some sort of event that's happening. Maybe it's a wedding, maybe it's a convention. That's typically why we have a group booking. Okay, so we're all there for one reason. Now, a little terminology with a group booking is, for instance, if you might hear the word attrition, okay, so that is the difference between the original amount of rooms that were agreed upon, okay, versus who actually showed up. Okay, so it's important to know that. Particularly if we're blocking off 300 rooms and only 5 rooms actually show up, well, that's really important to know because we could have sold those rooms, and that's going to help us understand for the future as well. And in regards to that, we also want to know what the cutoff date is. Okay, so if we book 100 rooms, we reserved 300 rooms for a group, okay, and their event isn't for another couple of weeks, do we still have to hold off those rooms till the last day? Well, no, necessarily. You can decide on a cutoff date and say, you know what, if you don't show up, or you don't sell 300 of those rooms within a month before your event, well, we can release those rooms and we can sell them to other segments. So that's important to know. When is the cutoff date? Finally, our third segment is our contract. So that can be considered typically a year contract where, similar to a group booking, you might have 20 or 30 rooms blocked off, maybe even on a weekly or daily basis. And those are blocked off for the entire year. So who would use such a contract? Typically aircrew, right? So if you might have Air Canada or Lufthansa staying with your hotel, and they'll stay with you all year round because they need those rooms. Also, CN Crew is another common contract that you'll see in hotels as well. Now, those are some macro segments, but we want to be as specific as possible, right? So the more we can target, the more specific, the more we can market to them appropriately and ensure that we're targeting what's relevant to their needs. So if we look at some sub-segments, we can move our transient. Okay, so again, going back to our individual travelers, we can start off here with retail, and retail is always at the top. It typically means our bar rate. Okay, so our best available rate, which is basically the rate that would be offered if anyone just walked in. No discounts or promotions would be applied to that rate. Okay, so that's sometimes known as our rack rate. Okay, and then all other rates are derived from the retail or the bar rate. Okay, so we have our discount rate. Maybe apply a 10% discount off the rack rate. Then we have our qualifying members. So there might be they might be seniors or AAA, most commonly known for a qualified rate. Then we have promotions, so maybe we want to have some sort of promotion to have people stay longer. We want them to book urgently, so we might throw a promotion in there. Of course, we're going to have a discount for that as well. And then we have our OTAs, so our third-party bookings, so our online travel agents. Those are also considered under transient. And of course, our packages, so maybe we're selling not just a hotel room, it might be a bed and breakfast. Maybe it's a shopping package, depending on what we can offer. So some sort of value add that we might have in a partnership with. Then we look at our corporate. Okay, so again, these are individual corporate travelers. We have our locally negotiated rates. Okay, so maybe at the property sales team, they might have negotiated a rate with a certain company that's locally run. Or we might have more national or key negotiated rates. So these are our sort of global officers might have some sort of rates that have been negotiated. Those are more national or international rates for corporate. And then finally, we have our government. They have their per diem, and that really just varies depending on the province or typically the province, okay? Or sometimes there might be federal RFPs, but those are, again, locally negotiated by the province. Then when we move on to our group, okay, so within our group subsegments, we still have our corporate, government. Now, associations, they could be certain, for instance, a Cocaine Anonymous Association, a very interesting association, but any association or a convention that can be considered an association. We have our SMERF, of course, social, military, education, religious, and fraternal. Then we have sport teams that can also be considered a group. So let's say you have a basketball team or, Little League, tennis, Little League. That's not tennis, no. Baseball makes more sense. And then finally, we have our wholesale. Okay, so John View, very common. Or JTB, Japanese Travel Bureau. Those are some very common groups that you'll see in our hotels. Now, you might ask yourself at this point, why is it so important to segment? Now, of course, we want to know the different characteristics, but we also want to think about it. What happens when our hotel if we anticipate that our hotel is going to be fully booked, okay? It's going to be very, very busy. Well, that's when you want to start thinking about which segments do you want in your hotel. Okay, and that's when we talk about the idea of optimal business mix. Okay, so it's not always about filling up your hotel, but you want to fill it up with the right segments. Okay, because again, if we go back to those characteristics, there's different average lengths of stay, there's different price sensitivities, there's different ancillary spends. So each segment has a different sort of level of profitability, regardless, sometimes seasonally. So it's really important to get that right mix, and that mix is very dynamic. Okay, so the right mix during your slow period might not be the right mix during your busy period, and that's what you have to think about, particularly when you're running the hotel revenue management, but also when you're running your SIM. So when you look at your SIM, okay, you want to think about that, and it would be a good suggestion to even think about what type of hotel do you want to run. Or what type of hotel do you want to build? Okay, so what kind of facilities do you want to have? Who are you trying to attract? Okay, and I want you to identify some of those segments and identify, what their purpose of travel is, what's their price sensitivity, where do you think their spend is, okay? Now, ancillary spend can actually be translated, if you take a look at the RevSim, into the total RevPAR, okay? So we've looked at RevPAR before. We talk about the hotel, the room revenue, but you want to think about the total revenue of the hotel, okay? That's going to imply that ancillary spend, that extra spending that people are spending on in your hotel, and that's going to be dependent on your segment. So I want you to take the time to sort of connect the dots in terms of which segments are spending what, and what type of mix do you have. Is it optimal? What type of optimal mix do you think you want to have maybe moving forward into year 2? So please have that in your report. Thanks for watching, and happy financing!